On November 19th, the BLM sold oil and gas leases on 29 parcels out of a total of 35 parcels that were offered for sale out of the Price and Vernal field offices of the BLM. The lease sale brought in nearly $3.4 million. This represents future economic development in Carbon, Emery, and Uinta counties from an area of about 44,000 acres. But the question today is, why were 100,000 acres of land that were supposed to be included in the lease deferred from the sale less than a week before the sale took place? We will explore the reasoning behind the last-minute changes to the sale and the impacts these decisions have made on the local communities that are involved, and whether this will change how industries view developing energy on public lands here in Utah. We will start the conversation with an interview I had with Director Palma in Ridgefield at a BLM meeting a short time ago. What was the process? How did it come to be that after we've gone through an RMP and we've had everything in place, just a few short days before an auction, 40,000 acres were left in the auction and 100,000 were taken out? How did that come about?
An entity or a third party puts forth an expression of interest, interested in a particular piece of ground that they would like to lease. We call that an expression of interest. Then we, the BLM, take that expression of interest and collect them all. Then the first thing we do is analyze, are those expressions of interest inside of wilderness study areas? If they are, we cannot move forward. Are they in wild and scenic rivers? If they are, we could move forward. But those that remain, that is, have to sift them, then we run them through what we call National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And we run them through a more specific concerns. Are there archaeological concerns? Are there other kinds of concerns? And then subsequent to that, we begin to even narrow that focus even further. And so there may be some, we allow for public protest. That is, public may have information that we may not have, or new information that we're just not aware of. And then we allow for that public protest. So that protest goes all the way to the very day of the sale. That is for us to resolve that. And our goal today with our current leasing reform is that we would resolve, if not all, most protests prior to the issuance of a lease. And so in this case, we're able to resolve the protest that we had. And so that's good for the companies, because then we could be able to, then when we ever issue the lease, we'll be able to issue that lease without any kind of encumbrance of a protest or litigation.
How is this withdrawal different than the 77 leases withdrawn in 2009?
Well, one of the things on this particular lease, which is referring to the November 19th lease, is that I became aware that there were some concerns, for example, archaeological concerns, mainly rock art, and also the Old Spanish Trail. And I became aware of some of those concerns towards the end of the protest period. And in order for me to address those concerns, I needed to be able to do more archaeological surveys for rock art, as an example, and allow for more discussion and more analysis on the Old Spanish Trail. And so this is different in that we are not deferring this process forever. We just simply deferring them to such a time that we can resolve some of these other concerns. I can tell you that out of those 77, we have put some of those back and have been sold. And in fact, one example is that we put 6 leases of the 77 on the West Tavaputs just a year ago. And those went for about $50 million. We sold those for about $50 million. So some of the 77 have been sold since then. We run them through the process that I described earlier, and then we're able to move forward. Others are still in litigation, and so those, we have to wait until the litigation is over to figure out what to do with those 77. But we're able to put those 77 leases back to lease them again, so long as we run them through the NEPA process.
Did litigation play a role in any of this, or threat of litigation, as far as this 100,000 acres?
No, none of that played a role. The decision that I made was based on the resources, archaeology, Old Spanish Trail, and that trying to find that balance between the environment and the economy, and finding that balance spot on this particular situation, it was really weighing those two things. And by the way, out of the 35 parcels that were on the lease today, 6 did not sell. 6 of those parcels were in Emery County. Now, the reasons could be a lot of reasons why they did not sell, but we did offer parcels in Emery County today that for whatever reasons, the companies that thought they were going to bid on them did not. And so that's another concern, because the last lease sale that we had, none of the parcels sold, even though we, the BLM, has spent considerable time in trying to prepare those parcels, run them through all the proper procedure. And so the question for us in the BLM is, we don't know. Just because somebody sent us a letter, an expression of interest, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to actually bid on that lease once we put it on the table.
But if you do the math on it, that's like you took off the table of the people that expressed interest 2/3 of the land that, so according to the RMP that was finished in 2008, should have been available, should it not?
It should have been available, other than the RMP, left some things that we needed to resolve. And a resource management plan is not an end-all unto itself. There's amendments to this resource management plans. As an example, the resource management plan left a little bit undone on our archaeological surveys. And sometimes they'll leave travel management for future time. So an RMP doesn't necessarily resolve all of the concerns and issues in and of itself, but it leaves some of the homework to be done later. In this case, we uncover that some of the homework that needs to be done still needs to happen in the near future, and that is, we need to do more surveys of archaeological sites that we probably should have done back in 2007 and 2008. We were just not able to do it because of time, because of money, because of staffing, whatever other reasons. And I think before we lease some of these parcels, we need to make sure that we don't impact some of those precious resources of archaeology.
Explain the process that the company went through that expressed interest in the leases or the acreage that was withheld. Did they incur costs in pursuing that lease that up to that point?
It could be, but the cost, at least from the BLM point of view, is literally a letter that a company sends to us. So they sent us a one-page letter. Sometimes it could be as simple as that, a few paragraphs, and they'll say, we express interest in this particular parcel. Really the homework is on the BLM part. From the moment we receive that letter, that expression of interest, then the homework is on us to make sure that that parcel, first of all, is it our land, BLM land? It could be SITLA, it could be private land. So the homework to see that the parcel indeed needs to be leased and indeed is BLM is really on our part. And in many cases we find that we cannot move forward with the lease for all kinds of reasons. It could be private land, it could be non-BLM land. So the proponents, the cost would be, it could be other costs that I'm not aware of, but the cost is simply the letter, the request of us to process that.
Any last comments you want to make to the people we'll be talking to a little bit later, the representatives of industry that we'll be talking to, or the county officials later in the show?
Utah has a tremendous portfolio of oil and gas, and that's undeniable that they have. In fact, we, the BLM, have approved about 5,000 new wells over the last 24 months, and we are working on another 5,000 wells, which is really where the economy is. The economy is not solely on the lease itself, the economy is when you actually begin to drill for the well. So over the next 36 months, we have the BLM approve or will approve in the range of 10,000 new wells. That's 100% more than Utah has had. So the overall program of oil and gas in Utah, we've contributed a lot from the BLM side. The other thing is that that's a good portfolio for the state, but equally as important is the portfolio of tourism and recreation. And for Utah, that portfolio of recreation tourism is over $6 billion. So that's an important part. We, the BLM, have to balance all those things, both the economy and the environment, oil and gas, our tourism, recreation. All of those components are part of a healthy financial portfolio for Utah. And we, BLM, have to look at all those aspects and components as well. Not only oil and gas, but what is important for our recreationists out there. And we think that this particular lease sale in November was a good balance for all of our recreationists, all of those people that love the outdoors. And not to say that we cannot resolve some of these parcels in the future, it just means we have to do a little more homework. Now we have a perspective of the thinking that went into the BLM decision. When we come back, we will talk to the Economic Development Director of Emery County about his thoughts on the appropriateness of the BLM's action and the impacts that he believes the deferred leases will have on Emery County. You are watching The County Seat. We'll be right back in just a minute.
Kanab, base camp for your southern Utah adventures. belong in Kanab.
Carbon County is typically known for its industry and coal production. But did you know Utah's Castle Country has something for everyone? The motocross track has been acclaimed as the most popular in Utah, with a variety of technical and natural terrain, and it even includes a pee-wee track. Visit castlecountry.com for more information.
Rediscover your sense of adventure by attending the 4th annual Monument Valley Balloon Event, December 13th through the 15th at the Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park, and the 16th annual Bluff International Balloon Festival, January 17th through the 19th in Bluff, Utah. Visit us for some of the most beautiful, unencumbered red rock flying in the Southwest, Utah's San Juan County, where life is elevated.
Welcome back to the County Seat. If you have missed our conversation so far today, we've been discussing the recent oil and gas lease sale, where just days before the auction, the BLM felt it was in the best interest of all concerned to withdraw 100,000 acres of land, over 2/3 of the offering from the sale. We will now join a conversation I recently had with Mike McCandless, the Economic Development Director for Emery County. I asked him about the timeline of events from his perspective.
It's a hard question to answer because there really was no timeline in the fact that we received absolutely no notification whatsoever from the BLM that this was going to occur. And by that I mean that my commissioners that I work for, as well as myself, literally all found out about it in the newspaper. My commissioners were at the UAC meeting in St. George, and all of a sudden there became this buzz in the room that they were sitting in as people started looking on their phones and seeing that this had been published in the Salt Lake Tribune, and started asking my commissioners, you know, what about this 100,000 acres? What about this 100,000, of which they knew absolutely nothing about. And so they were out of town, were not aware of that decision, were not communicated to by the BLM or anyone else involved. And so, you know, that timeline wasn't one, it was just a notification. One of our core concerns about that is that we have always cooperated with the BLM as a cooperating agency, which is a federally determined standard that we have in NEPA, or National Environmental Policy Act processes, like the leasing of this coal, like the resource management plans. We've believed that we've been acting in good faith as a cooperating agency or cooperating partner, that those kinds of notifications decisions would be vetted there prior to the press. So the timeline you're asking about is really tough because there really was not one in terms of notification. We frankly were not surprised, simply because we've seen this with the 77 lease and so forth, but we're troubled by the lack of communication by the agencies as we deal with issues like this.
BLM would respond to this by saying, well, we saw that this could be trouble, and so we decided to withhold 100,000 acres before it was put up to auction instead of after, and money had changed hands, like the 77 leases that hit out on the eastern part of the state.
But they did it literally right before, you know, and it is clear from the processes that took place that they did that in at least some communication with the environmental groups who had the concerns. Once again, not giving the county a chance to provide communication, not giving any of the other interveners or cooperating agencies. It appears as if the representatives of the environmental groups that wanted to stop that were in communication with them, at least at some level. All you have to do is look at a lot of the press reports that came out that day. They were clearly diving in neck deep in preparing for this, which once again we're not surprised by, but once again much of that information frankly could have been rebutted during the previous time. I think the core concern we have is that we believe we went through a process prior to 2008 to deal with all of these issues. We went through a 6-year, $38 million resource management plan decision-making process with the BLM. We were fully engaged partners, literally 1 or 2 meetings a week, face-to-face, open meetings, conversing about these very issues, and in particular to these specific leases. At the very end of the RMP process, in the price RMP, they stopped everything, said we need to add an additional alternative because there are some areas that were nominated and looked at by these other groups that we need to address. We stopped, went back, submitted additional comments to the BLM, and those are areas that are specifically addressed in these leases, saying, here's the way that these activities have been, these are areas that have been mined and had drilling for almost 100 years. And we documented that, submitted binders of information to the BLM during that alternative E part of the RMP. They finished the RMP, came up with a decision that said, there are areas that have wilderness characteristics or other concerns. However, we are making a decision to manage them in these ways. Oil and gas drilling in these particular areas. So there's not 1 acre of the land that's under dispute right now that was not identified in the RMP that it would be eligible. The companies that had an interest nominated these areas for lease because the BLM said, this is where it's approved, this is where it's okay. The Emery County agreed with that in our cooperating status, and we believed we were already on the track to get to the right place.
The BLM had indicated that the reason they reserved this lease and withheld these acres is all stemming around archaeological concerns of rock art. They specifically mentioned the old Spanish Trail. What's your response to that?
Well, we have 2 concerns. We know that there are groups out there who've been pushing an agenda specifically trying to utilize the Spanish Trail as a means to block any kind of development. From what we understand, these groups are requesting as much as a 7-mile buffer around the recognized route of the old Spanish Trail, ironically, which goes through one of these lease areas. It's basically being used as a hostage tool to reserve these lands and say, well, we can't impact anything within these areas, even though you've got county roads, you've got Rocky Mountain Power high capacity lines, you've got all these other things in that very same location. They've identified this as an opportunity as a way to stop development. It's purely a traditional way that many of the environmental groups look for that one little key thing they can use to hold a project hostage. In terms of archaeological, our concern is very specific. We have projects today that Emery County is waiting on and has been waiting on for multiple years because of one factor, that they do not have enough staffing to go out and do the archaeological clearances. Knowing that we're already backlogged multiple years on small projects, when we hear that a very large 100,000 acre project like this is being held back or deferred because of archaeological clearance, we're seeing this much more as a permanent problem than a deferral, because we know they haven't been willing to throw resources at this archaeological issue in Emery County in the past. As an example, we've been trying to work on some road issues, basically transitioning of road, who does the maintenance on roads from the BLM to Emery County. We're willing to do the work. We're waiting on archaeology, have been waiting for years. In this particular case, what I described earlier about having the companies bear that responsibility if they want to do the lease is the way that it works in most places. Why have the BLM do that archaeological expense when a company who's willing to do lease recognizes they have to do that? Let that bill be picked up and let it be done commercially quickly. It's the same result, the same output. The BLM still has to accept it, but you're basically just stalling that out by having it waiting until the BLM can actually do that.
So where would the BLM get the kind of information they need and documentation on the old Spanish Trail? If that becomes a part of the issue,
sure.
You know, who should they talk to? I would say
in this particular area, it's another interesting reason why they haven't reached out to us. Emery County and some of the people we work with and contract with are the experts. I mean, we actually have members of our public lands group and that who participate in the National Old Trail Society. We, in part of our responses in the RMP, did significant research into the old Spanish Trail. It was one of the things we stopped the RMP process, had lengthy discussions, provided significant information. It appears useless. You know, once again, Emery County probably is the expert in this particular area, in that particular venue, as we're talking about the old Spanish Trail. We're the ones doing all the signage. We're doing the ones the protection. We've been doing signs on the old Spanish Trail since probably the 60s, and identification and routing, not the BLM, Emery County. But they didn't come to us, didn't ask us those questions. It's just now shown up as a possible concern.
Is that going to permanently eliminate potential from some of these
Well,
bidders?
here's
going to drive them somewhere else?
Absolutely. I mean, if you went to the Uinta Basin Energy or Summit that was happening, I think in September, listen to what the companies are saying. There are places where what we are competing for is dollars. If those companies have an easier time drilling in locations where they are not having these fights, those dollars go somewhere else. It's very clear. They basically, the margins become so thin with every layer of bureaucracy that we throw on and every permit that we throw on, the dollars begin to flow another direction. Eventually those dollars even begin to flow out of the United States. And so every time we deal with something like this, time costs these companies money. So if we defer or delay these, that costs the company money, which costs our local economy money. As we're transitioning away from coal, one of the opportunities that exist is oil and gas because those resources are here. But if the BLM puts us in a position those are no longer viable, they're putting us in a negative position in terms of being competitive.
When we come back, we will talk to representatives of the energy producers to find out about the value of those parcels and talk to a representative of the oil and gas industry to find out how public land policies affect where industries choose to do business.
Almost 45% of the oil produced in Utah, 7.8 million barrels, comes from Duchesne County. That oil feeds our state economy, provides job growth, and supports local business. Here in Duchesne County, we're working to make Utah an economic, cultural, and technological leader. Whether you're here for business or pleasure, Duchesne County will welcome you with open arms and invite you to explore all the beauty of the Uinta Mountains. Duchesne County, close enough for business, far enough to get away.
Get ready, set, jump! The day starts off at sunrise with the Cisco Disco. Come catch Cisco fish at Cisco Beach on the east side of Bear Lake. After the fishing, why not jump in the lake yourself? The Bear Lake Monster Polar Plunge starts at 11 a.m. at the Bear Lake State Park Arena. All proceeds from the event go to Primary Children's Medical Center. Gather your family and head north for a great cause. Visit bearlake.org for more information. Rich County, take the plunge.
The Morgan Area Chamber of Commerce presents 50 Things to Do in Morgan, the Browning Outlet Store. Browning clothes and other hunting gear at outlet prices. Snow skiing. Snow Basin is a world-class resort offering great terrain, breathtaking vistas, and that famous Utah powder. Photography of trains, scenery, and wildlife. Come see why Morgan, with its rustic train bridges and abundant wildlife, is a destination for photographers. Sledding. Morgan has lots of great hills and soft powder. Ice fishing. Morgan has 2 great reservoirs to fish, East Canyon and Lost Creek. Old Time Christmas. An old-fashioned hometown Christmas celebration complete with the largest nativity in Utah. To learn more or find more activities in Morgan, visit gomorgan.org. Morgan County, easy to work, healthy to live.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today has been the withdrawal of leases on oil and gas leasing. So far in the show, we covered an interview we had with State Director Juan Palma. So we've got the federal government's point of view. We talked to a county official from Emery County, Mike McCandless. So we've got the county level. Now we want to talk to industry. So joining us for this interview is Kathleen Sgamma. She is the Vice President of Government and Public Affairs for the Western Energy Allaince. What kind of impacts does that have on the industry, both short-term and long-term, when this sort of thing happens?
Well, it's created a lot of uncertainty in the leasing process and in the federal onshore process in general. When companies don't know when they'll be able to get a lease through from nomination to sale, and if that's going to be in any kind of reasonable time, then it's harder for them to plan any type of development in an area. So I think, too, what we saw in that lease sale was some of the leases in Emery County, which obviously a company had nominated, suddenly they didn't sell. And why didn't they sell? Well, there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether other leases, adjacent leases, will later be brought up for sale. So when you don't know if there's going to be controversy surrounding those leases for a long time, or even if you get leases, you don't know when you're going to get through the environmental analysis, through the permitting process, it's really hard to plan a business.
The BLM's thought in general about this is, well, you know, we had concerns about the 100,000 acres. We took them off. We didn't want the companies to spend money if there were going to be like challenges and protests, which there were.
if you as a company thought, you know what, I want this leasehold acreage. That means you put together a good chunk of leased land. That doesn't mean you're going to develop on all of it, because you have to do some general exploratory work to find out where those sweet spots might be. If you can't get that a decent chunk of your leasehold, you might back off and say, you know what, if they're just going to give me a few small acres scattered here and there, it's not worth it. I can't put enough together to make a viable project.
Does that sometimes seem like an intentional strategy to restrict energy development?
I don't know if I'd go there, but I would say generally what we're seeing is huge interest in exploring for natural gas and oil in Utah. We have about 3 million acres that have been nominated, there's no clarity on when that might come up, either from deferral or come up to lease sale. So there's huge interest, but we're seeing lease sales of very small amounts. And when you just kind of see them here and there, it doesn't give you an ability, or a company an ability to plan for the future. So I see more the dynamic being that the counties, the state, working with the federal government, working with the on-the-ground BLM people, analyze these areas for years and years and years. They put together a plan that gets input in from environmental community, industry, certainly the local communities. And then when we finally go to lease, they do more analysis. And then at the last minute, we'll see 1 or 2 environmental groups come in and say, oh wait, no, we don't like that. And all that good on-the-ground work being done in the state, both at BLM and counties, is suddenly just gone like that from an order from Washington, D.C.
Do you see that as a stalling tactic?
Yes, absolutely. It's an absolute stalling tactic. The environmental groups know, because they have many points they can sue and many ways they're let into the process, and the public should be part of the process. But there are so many places where they're analyzing again and again and again that they just keep asking us to analyze it. Take in point this lease sale. Last minute, parcels deferred. You'll hear BLM say, they're not deferred forever. We're just, we have to just analyze more. Well, no, you've already done that analysis. Really, when they defer, you don't see leasing come up for years later. It's the top-down SUA approach of we just want to lock everything away. We don't care if 75% of the county is closed to economic development. We just want nothing in it.
Kathleen, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your participating in the County Seat. Remember, local government is where your life happens. It has the most impact on your life. Get involved, and please tell your friends to watch us and comment on Facebook. We'll see you next week on the County Seat.